My name is Craig Drury, and I am going to be analyzing the assassination scene from Buffalo 66, directed by Vincent Gallo. The film has a lot of fun scenes and sequences. This scene in particular was the easiest to put a frame on and analyze, it being the climax of the story. I'll fill you in. Up until this point, we've learned that Billy Brown, our main character, has just gotten out of jail for a crime he didn't commit, that he had to plead guilty to in order to escape certain doom for making a bad bet on a Buffalo game that was lost by the kicker Scott Woods. The scene starts as Billy Brown enters Scott Woods' strip club, where he plans to confront and kill the kicker. At 1 hour and 38 and a half minutes into the film, the screen fills with a golden curtain. The color palette is warmer than the rest of the film, which is shot on 35 millimeter film, and it gives it kind of an old look. And for most of the film, the color tones are cool. However, in this scene, the color tones are warm, similar to other surreal dream sequences in the film earlier on. Billy Brown emerges from behind the curtain in a medium shot. His gaze is fixed straight behind the camera. He's focusing right through the camera. What is he looking at? The camera cuts to reveal that we are indeed in Scott Woods' strip club. There's a topless dancer dancing on a bar. The camera cuts back to Billy in a long shot, establishing that he is also in that same place with a booth to his left and a topless dancer on top. The cuts happen in time. The cuts happen in time to the soundtrack music, Heart of the Sunrise by Yes, which director Vincent Gallo uses to great effect to increase the tension in the scene. We see Vincent Gallo observe his surroundings and move forward. He's looking around and coming in and out of focus, kind of like one would imagine somebody would feel in a strip club. The camera tracks back and pans to keep Billy in the center of the frame, but only really moves on his footsteps. The scene then cuts to a stage with 3 exotic dancers and red, white, and blue stage lights, alternating in time to the music, I believe highlighting the multiple choices that Billy Brown is faced with at this moment. It then cuts back to Billy Brown looking up at the stage. I believe that the absence of any other sounds going on in the club leads me to believe that the soundtrack right now is non-diegetic and that this song is not actually what's playing in the strip club, even though some of the dancers appear to be dancing in time to it. The scene then cuts to a panning shot of the bar and somewhat ugly debauchery with large men and not particularly attractive women in this bar environment. The camera pan ends on Billy Brown facing away from the camera and looking up at the stage. He then turns around and leans over the bar, and you can see his mouth clearly mouth the word Scott Woods to the bartender who's leaning in to hear him. She then turns to look at us, and smiles a kind of grisly smile and points in our direction. Starting a reverse shot pattern, the camera cuts to a long shot of a table with a fat, topless man, a nearly empty bottle of liquor, and three topless women, all kind of undulating grossly. It cuts back to our protagonist, Billy Brown, stepping away from the bar and walking with a determined look, staring right into the camera. The camera then cuts back to our table with the fat man in a close-up shot, finishing a shot of liquor, staring straight into the camera with kind of a serious, almost angry look, setting up a clear conflict. Reverse shot, back to Billy Brown, gulping and looking over his shoulder. We haven't seen the two men in the same shot yet, but it's clear that their eyes have just met. The camera then cuts back to the fat man, we assume is Scott Woods, and the ladies around him are now noticing something in front of them. The merriment kind of stops. The camera then cuts back to Billy Brown in a low-angle shot, revealing him pulling his pistol from his waistband and pointing it. The camera focus shifts from Billy Brown's face to his hand and his gun, as his head leans back and is almost replaced by a bright light behind him. The background music is now at its most frenetic. Billy opens his mouth as if to scream, and then we hear the sound of a gunshot. The music stops, and everything is silent. The camera then cuts back to a close-up of a frozen Scott Wood with a bullet hole in his head, in a tracking bullet time shot which was made famous by The Matrix, but done to great effect first in this film. The camera tracks around from the front to the back of Scott Wood's head, revealing, frozen in the air, a gruesome splatter of blood from the back of Scott Wood's head. We then cut back to Billy Brown's gun. Billy Brown bends his arm, puts the gun to his temple, and we hear another gunshot pierce the silence. In the same bullet time tracking motion, we see Billy Brown with a bullet hole in the side of his head, tracking to the other side to reveal another bloody splatter. In a series of cuts and bullet time tracking shots, we see Billy Brown fall to the floor. In silence, the camera cuts to Scott Woods laying on the ground in a pool of blood. It cuts back to Billy Brown laying on the ground in a pool of blood. We then begin to hear Billy Brown's mother shouting, "Tackle him, tackle him," as the scene dissolves from the gruesome scene of Billy Brown's death into what we assume is his funeral. A handheld camera takes a few steps and begins a low-angle shot of Billy Brown's mother and father sitting next to a freshly filled grave. Billy Brown's mother is watching a game on a handheld TV, yelling at the TV like any obnoxious sports fan. Billy's dad pipes up and in his grumpy dad tone insists that they leave. It's cold. He's getting the shakes. It's clear that this is Billy's grave, but not a word has been spoken about him. The shot then fades to black. From the funeral scene, the scene then fades back into Billy Brown, dead on the floor in a pool of blood. The camera cuts from one angle, moving slightly, to another angle, moving slightly. As the gruesome scene of Billy Brown, bloody on the floor, square irises in, the scene behind it begins to reveal itself as the same strip club with Billy Brown standing in the same spot he was moments before this bloody altercation takes place. As Billy Brown's face comes into focus, he looks less grisly. Murder is no longer on his mind. And we see in the next cut the two men in the same shot for the first time. Scott Woods pours a shot, looks up at Billy Brown, and extends his arm in the shot. The tone of the song in the background changes to something much more cheery, and we begin to hear the sounds in the strip club. Billy looks to the side, turns around, and walks away. The camera pans to follow him, but does not track. The tones also here seem to be cooler and bluer, as Billy Brown leaves through the same gold curtain through which he entered earlier. The shot ends with a glittered heel shoe tapping to the rhythm of the music. I really like this film, Buffalo 66. I like its low budget feel that makes it feel really authentic. Also, the way the sound is handled in this movie. There was no dialogue present in this scene, but in most scenes with dialogue, the sound is right up front. It's almost a mono channel, not mixed very well. I don't think there's much use of Foley Studios. It's almost all really diegetic. The musical soundtrack of this film is used really sparsely and almost only in kind of dreamy sequences like the one we just talked about. I like these dreamy, surreal sequences that take place a couple times in the film, but the most surreal thing about the whole film is that it's almost this caveman love story in which a man kidnaps a woman, and somehow, by the end of this film, they're in love, despite him being kind of a wreck and an asshole the whole time. Anyway, thanks for listening to me.